Like I've been, kind of putting disclaimers in front of these audiobooks. I'm really sick, so my voice is going to go in and out. Hopefully, it's still able to like take in the information of this book. It's called The Black Awakening in Capitalist America. This is the third part. I'm going to put the other parts in the Jumbotron as well as the PDF. 1 second. All right. So I got it in the Jumbotron. Let me pull it up on my phone, and then I'll make it to spitting. All right. Got some water. All right. At its 1966 National Convention meeting in Baltimore, Maryland, the Congress of Racial Equality endorsed Black Power. A unanimously adopted resolution said in part, Black Power is effective control and self-determination by men of color in their own areas. Power is total control of the economic, political, educational, and social life of our community from the top to the bottom. The exercise of power at the local level is simply what all groups in American society have done to acquire their share of total American life. The summer of 1966 was an important turning point for CORE, as it was for SNCC. Until then, CORE had been an integrationist organization relying on the tactics of nonviolent, direct action to achieve its goals. Founded by James Farmer in 1942 as an offshoot of the Quaker Pacifist Fellowship of Reconciliation, CORE immediately set out on an activist course. It organized the first sit-ins in Chicago in 1942, and it sent the first Freedom Riders through South in April 1947. Over the years, the organization's membership grew from the initial handful of Black and white activists. Like SNCC, CORE was a middle-class organization. It differed from SNCC in that SNCC members, being younger, were not yet committed to middle-class jobs or middle-class lifestyles. It was therefore easier for SNCC members to identify with the impoverished Black majority. CORE differed from the NAACP in that the latter is wealthier, better established, more solidly bourgeois. The NAACP aims at reforming certain aspects of a system whose assumptions it shares. It carries out these reformist efforts through the social accepted channels of the ballot box, court cases, and legislative lobbying. CORE, on the other hand, while being a more militant and less affluent organization than the NAACP, still does not reject the basic ideological assumptions of American society, although it may question them. CORE employed less orthodox and more militant methods of reform. It used direct action techniques in an effort to bring pressure on institutions it sought to change. As some observers have noted, at a given point after pressure from outside the system has been successful, it is possible for the less privileged reformist group to be allowed to work inside of the system. CORE was eclipsed by William L. Patterson's Civil Rights Congress until 1951, then by Martin Luther King's campaigns in the middle 1950s and the student sit-ins, which began in 1960. It was not until it organized the renowned Freedom Rides to Alabama and Mississippi in 1961 that CORE was catapulted into national prominence. As a result of these activities, the organization's membership began to change. In 1963, Black members for the first time accounted for more than half of CORE's total membership. CORE was attracting to its ranks militant, middle-class Blacks who were disillusioned with the NAACP. The following year, The Brooklyn chapter announced that it would organize a Stalin on the opening day of the New York World's Fair to protest discrimination in hiring practice at the fairgrounds. This was indicative of the organization's new militancy and shifting of its focus to the urban north. This announcement touched off a heated controversy both within and outside of CORE. Another sign of CORE's shifting center of gravity occurred in November 1964. Clarence Fournier, then chairman of the Manhattan chapter, announced that his group would abandon demonstrations in favor of long-range economic and social programs in Harlem. The organization still had integration as its goal, but it was trying to address itself to the needs of Northern Blacks, for whom de facto segregation and the lack of adequate housing and jobs were more serious problems than the kind of de jure discrimination which had characterized the South. A further sign was the interest expressed by the downtown New York chapter in organizing an independent political party. The chapter chairman asserted that this was necessary because exiting local political organizations were incapable of bringing about needed improvements. Meanwhile, Brooklyn CORE was then involved in organizing rent strikes. At its 1965 convention, the theme of which was Black Ghetto, the Awakening Giant, CORE rescinded its constitutional ban on partisan political activity. The new emphasis within the organization was summarized and in effect given official sanction by National Director James Farmer. The major war now confronting us is aimed at harnessing the awesome political potential of the Black community in order to effect basic social and economic changes for all Americans, to alter meaningfully the lives of the Black Americans, and to bring about a real equality of free men. That was a quote from James Farmer. The government could not do this job, Farmer asserted, because of its built-in resistance to fundamental change. We can rely upon none but ourselves as a catalyst in the development of the potential power of the Black community in its own behalf and in behalf of the nation. It is clear that objectives we seek in the wiping out of poverty and unemployment, elimination of bad housing, city planning for integration in housing and schools, quality education, are political objectives depending upon responses we can exact from political machinery. We can no longer rely on pressuring and cajoling of political units toward desired action. We must be in a position of power, a position to change those political units when they are not responsive. Farmer contended that what was needed was independent political action through indigenous political organizations, modeled after the MFDP. Such ghetto-oriented political movements must avoid at all costs, he said, becoming an adjunct to or tool of any political party, bloc, or machine. They must be controlled by the interests of the Black ghetto alone. Another significant development at the 1965 convention was the introduction of a resolution opposing United States involvement in the Vietnam War. The resolution was tabled, however, on a plea from Farmer. The man who chaired his convention was Floyd McKissick, then national chairman. The following year, in March, McKissick was named to replace Farmer as national director. I get water. McKissick was born in Asheville, North Carolina in 1922. He graduated from Morehouse College in Atlanta, one of the great training institutions for the Black bourgeois, and then went on to the University of North Carolina Law School, where he took a law degree. McKissick mixed civil rights activity with his legal career, and began in 1960. He became one of the leaders of the Senate movement in North Carolina. The Black Power resolution passed by CORE in 1966 seemingly eliminated racial integration as the group's goal and instead replaced it with the goal of racial coexistence through Black power. But what is this racial coexistence if it is not simply another form of group assimilation? CORE has substituted militant-sounding group integration for the now discredited goal of individual integration. The difference was in degree, not in kind. The resolution also contained the sentence, "It is significant to note that historically, the only times in the United States when great numbers of Black people have been mobilized has been around the concept of nationalism, as in the case of Marcus Garvey and the Muslims. This is important to keep in mind because at subsequent conventions, the organization would be racked by disputes between orthodox Black nationalists and those who adhered to the new nationalist position advocated by Roy Innis. The traditional nationalists wanted CORE to come out in favor of a separate territory for Black people, but Innes projected the idea of a Black nation of city-states dispersed throughout the country. In 1968, this dispute would provoke a split in CORE's ranks. On the question of violence, CORE tried to straddle the fence. The Baltimore meeting adopted a resolution urging that CORE continue its adherence to the tactic of direct nonviolent action, that the concepts of nonviolence and self-defense are not contradictory, nonviolent meaning non-aggressive, but not precluding the natural, constitutional, and inalienable right of self-defense. CORE was reshaping itself. It was attempting to respond to and organize the new militancy which had infected certain parts of the Black middle class as a result of the rebellions initiated by the Black masses. In so doing, CORE was to assume a role akin to that played by bourgeois nationalist political elites in an underdeveloped country undergoing a transformation from colonialism to neocolonialism. I got some water. By the time SNCC and CORE raised the cry of Black power, the sophisticated white establishment already had begun to sketch the general outlines of its response to the new Black militancy. It was not so much the specific slogan of Black power that motivated this response. Rather, it was prompted by the same domestic conditions that underlay the rise of Black militancy. The failure of the civil rights movement to alleviate the continuing impoverishment of the Black communities and the subsequent urban outbreaks. The rebellions especially forced white reactionaries and liberals alike to conclude that direct white administration of the Black ghettos, at least in some instances, was no longer operating satisfactorily. Some new form of administration was clearly called for if the ghettos were to be pacified and law and order restored. Of course, there were some, mostly at the state and local government levels, who thought brutal repression to be the best answer. Traditional liberals, though, still hope to find a panacea in government-sponsored social welfare programs, but a drastically new situation necessarily calls forth a drastically new response. Basically, what he's describing is that during the times of the rebellions in the late 60s, crackers from every part of the political spectrum and every economic class were literally clutching their pearls like, y'all need to get these Black colonies under control pronto, and basically agreed to violent repression, where some of the more liberal crackers usually would be like, oh, let's just extend social programs and, give them crumbs so that they'll, allow us to keep exploiting them. But even they had saw the writing on the wall, like we might have hit a breaking point. So we need to subdue these people. It's basically what he's describing. Let's see. Yeah, okay. The beginnings of the new response could be glimpsed in Ford Foundation President McGeorge Bundy's August 2nd, 1966 address to the National Urban League's annual banquet in Philadelphia. We believe, said Bundy, that full equality for all American Negroes is now the most urgent domestic concern of this country. We believe that Ford Foundation must play its full part in this field because it is dedicated by its character to human welfare. Bundy told the Urban League meeting that in addition to the familiar fields of jobs, education, and housing, the foundation thought that the areas of leadership, research, communication, and justice were also important concerns for the Black movement. He suggested that stronger leadership was needed because it is easier to understand and work for the recognition of basic civil rights than it is to understand and work for improvements in skills in schools and real opportunity in the quality of life itself, which are the next business of us all. In other words, as the civil rights movement faded away, a new breed of Black and white leader were required to negotiate the road from right to reality. In the area of research, Bundy threw out several questions which he said needed answers. What kinds of better schools will help most to turn the tide of hope upward in the ghettos? What pattern of cooperation among whites and Negroes, business, labor, and government can bring new levels of investment to both the city center and the southern rural slum? What really are the roots of prejudice and how can we speed its early and widespread death? The first two questions are especially significant because Bundy was later to become deeply embroiled in New York City school decentralization dispute, and the foundation would play a leading role in promoting private business investment in the ghetto. Anticipating this latter development, Bundy urged in his remarks that strong-minded business leadership can and put itself in the forefront of the effort to open doors for the Negroes. Basically, he saw this as a business opportunity and co-opted the language of the people, of Black people at the time who were rebelling, and basically painted it in like a Black bourgeois friendly wrapping to where they're like, oh, okay, he says he wants the end of racism, so therefore, and then you find out that actually no, he was doing this for his own economic interest and also to help privatize and further exploit the Black community. Significantly, Bundy also hinted that the political arena was to assume greater importance. Let me grab some water. Okay. Also hinted that the political arena was to assume greater importance in the Black struggle. We know that political influence brings political results, he told the group. He did not say, however, that the foundation would soon play an indirect part in electing Carl Stokes as the first Negro mayor of Cleveland. Communication is of utmost importance, Bundy stressed, because the prospects for peaceful progress are best when men with different parts to play keep talking straight and clear one to another. Nothing is more dangerous in such a time than for men to lose touch with each other. In this, Bundy was absolutely right. He knew that the rebellion signaled a serious breakdown in communication between ghetto residents and municipal, state, and federal power structures. Thus, communication, which in the lexicon of those who wield power, is synonymous with control and to be restored at any cost. Basically, the propaganda wasn't propagandizing enough, and the conditions got too horrid that the people were like, all right, fuck enough. We got nothing else to lose. You took every fucking thing. And they were like, all right, so we need to make this propaganda a little stronger. We got to revamp the system. We got to, basically got to zhuzh it up a little bit. So that's what he explained. Let's see. Finally, Bundy came to the heart of what he wanted to say. He told the Urban League group that there are certain interlocking institutions which bind Blacks and whites together. One of the most important of these is the city, and the quality of our cities is inescapably the business of all of us. Many whites recognize that no one can run the American city by Black power alone. The reason being, he suggested at a later point, that urban Black majorities would still be faced with white majorities in state houses and the U.S. Congress. But if the Blacks burn the cities, then he stated it would be the white man's fault, and importantly, the white man's companies will have to take the losses. White America is not so stupid as not to comprehend this elemental fact. Bundy assured the Urban Leaguers something would be done about the urban problem. Massive help would be given to the ghettos, and the Ford Foundation would take the lead in organizing the campaign. Thus, the Ford Foundation was on its way to becoming the most important, though least publicized, organization manipulating the militant Black movement. It's so interesting because Ford is also another foundation that helped usher in the current fascist regime in India. I'm reading a book called Capitalism, a Ghost Story. And yeah, it lists a bunch of companies. And of course, the Ford Foundation is right there. Housed in an ultra-modern headquarters, building on East 43rd Street in New York, the foundation is deeply involved in financing and influencing almost all major protest groups, including CORE, SCLC, the National Urban League, and NAACP. Working directly or indirectly through these organizations, as well as other national and local groups, the foundation hopes to channel and control the Black liberation movement and forestall future urban revolts. The foundation catalogs its multitude of programs and grants under such headings as public affairs, education, science and engineering, humanities and the arts, international training and research, economic development, and seas development. The list reads like a selection from the courses offered by a modern liberal arts college. Race problems are listed as a subclass of public affairs. Under the leadership of Bundy, former special assistant to the president of national security affairs, and in this capacity, one of the chief architects of this country's aggression in Vietnam, the Ford Foundation, in 1966, made an important decision to expand its activities in the Black movement. Prior to that time, the organization had limited its activities among Black Americans to I'm trying to say philanthropy, but with the pick at the end. Sorry, y'all. Some words just be kicking my ass. efforts in education and research projects, all aimed at incorporating more Blacks into the middle class mainstream. The 1966 decision, which was made in response to the Black rebellions, was a logical extension of an earlier decision to vigorously enter the political arena. Got some water. Okay, where did I go? Established in 1936 by Henry and Edsel Ford, the foundation initially made grants largely to charitable and educational institutes in the state of Michigan. According to its charter, the purpose of the organization is to receive and administer funds for scientific, educational, and charitable purposes, all for public welfare, and for no other purposes. Most of the foundation's income has derived from its principal asset, Class A non-voting stock in the Ford Motor Company. In 1950, serving as an outlet for war profits, the foundation expanded into a national organization, and its activities quickly spread throughout the United States and some 80 foreign countries. In a special board of trustees report prepared at that time, the foundation announced its intention of becoming active in public affairs by supporting activities designed to secure greater allegiance to the basic principles of freedom and democracy, and y'all know what that means, in the solution of an insistent problems of an ever-changing society. Basically, keep white supremacy, capitalism at all costs. This vague mandate, which at first meant little else than underwriting efforts to upgrade public administration, was gradually brought into sharper focus as the foundation experimented with new programs. In 1962, Dyke Brown, then a vice president with responsibility for public affairs programs, could write that the foundation's interest had shifted from management and public administration to policy and the political process. He added that these programs tended to become increasingly action rather than research oriented, which meant that the foundation had to be prepared to take certain political risks. How an officer of a supposedly non-political, non-partisan philanthropy institution could justify such a statement can be understood by examining how the foundation views its relationship to the major political parties and the government. Simply stated, the foundation sees itself as a mediator which enlightens Democrats and Republicans as to their common interests and the reasons why they should cooperate. For example, the foundation has sponsored many nonpartisan conferences of state legislators and officials with the purpose of stressing non-political consideration of common problems. Such bipartisan activities ensure the smooth functioning of state and local political machinery by reducing tensions and other sources of political conflict, which might upset the national structure and operation of the U.S. corporate society. One specific role of the private foundation vis-a-vis the government was made explicit by Henry T. Held, Bundy's predecessor as president of the Ford Foundation, in a speech given at Columbia University in 1965. In this country, privately supported institutions may serve this public need as fully as publicly supported ones, Held said. More often than not, they work side by side in serving the same need. What accounts for the growth of this dual system of public and private decision in community and national affairs? He questioned. For one thing, privately supported organizations enhance the public welfare by their relatively broad freedom to innovate. They can readily try out new ideas and practices. They can adopt improved techniques and standards that may become models for the institutions in their fields, both public and private. So basically, this cracker is saying that, look, we created a foundation that became so large that we were able to expand globally and also reach our powers into political outcomes. And that oftentimes, when they see that, oh, well, y'all doing a little too much, there's a way that y'all could work together behind the scenes so that we can still keep this empire afloat and before the peasants come and chop all our heads off. It's basically the job of a Ford foundation. And he basically explains it just like that. And the thing is that I hate to describe the oppressed in this way, but this is how a cracker sees us as pawns, to just be moved on the board whenever they and however they see fit to get the desired outcomes that they want, almost like a game, but with human life and human suffering and incredible violence. When you think of it like that, it kind of just, I hope it removes that veil that we live in this open and free society and instead to see reality as it is, that I don't care how many GE appliances you have, I don't care how many bedrooms you have, I don't care if you have a 1-bedroom apartment or a 3-bedroom house, bruh. Nigga, we on a plantation. We're in an open air prison. And they're not gonna let us free. We are literally going to have to fight to set ourselves free. Let me get back to the book because I can run my mouth. One specific role of the private foundations. Oh, I'm sorry, I read that. In short, Hare argued that though their activities, private foundations could serve as a kind of advance guard, paving the way for later government activity, not only in the usual fields of education and scientific research, but also in the area of social welfare. Hence, the private foundation can act as an instrument of social innovation and control in areas which the government has not yet penetrated, or in areas where direct government intervention would draw criticism. An example of the former is the Federal Anti-Poverty Program. Well in advance of federal efforts in this field, the foundation made grants for comprehensive anti-poverty projects in Boston, New Haven, Oakland, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and North Carolina. Over the years, then, the foundation's objectives shifted as it assumed a more aggressive role in American society and the American empire abroad. No longer simply a charitable organization in a strict sense, the foundation has become a major social institution dedicated to preserving social stability and encouraging economic development of neo-colonial nature, both in the United States and in those parts of the world which the U.S. government and business interests consider to be of strategic importance. Stability and capitalist development are essential to the tranquil internal growth and external expansion of the American empire. Instability and underdevelopment, whether at home or abroad, breed violence and revolution. It is for this reason that by the end of 1966, the foundation had committed $72 million to research and population control in the United States, Britain, Europe, Israel, Australia, Asia, and Latin America. It is for this reason that it devotes approximately 1/5 of its annual budget to training personnel and building economic institutions to underdeveloped countries. It is for this reason that a year after Bundy's Philadelphia speech, the foundation was to grant a substantial sum to CORE, the money to be used for peaceful and constructive efforts, in quotes, in Cleveland's rebellious Ho district. And it is for this reason that in September 1968, it announced plans to invest an initial $10 million in the building of Black capitalism. To come to the point, the Ford Foundation has shaped itself into one of the most sophisticated instruments of American neocolonialism in underdeveloped nations, whether abroad or within the borders of this country. This is the general line of foundation thinking which confronted Bundy as he stepped from his little State Department, in quotes, in the White House and at the beginning of 1966. Grab some water. And he was ideally suited to further advancing these aims. From his years of working in the U.S. power structure, Bundy had nurtured a keen appreciation for the complexities involved in political manipulation and the seemingly contradictory policies which often must be pursued simultaneously in order to obtain a given end. Bundy summarized his political outlook in an article entitled The End of Either or, published in January 1967, the magazine Foreign Affairs. Bundy first asserted that foreign policy decisions are related to U.S. national interests, although he did not state who determines these interests or set priorities. He then went on to criticize those who view foreign policy options in terms of simple extremes. For 20 years, from 1940 to 1960, the standard pattern of decision on foreign policy was that of either or, isolation or intervention, Europe or Asia, Wallace or Barnes, Marshall Plan or bust, CETO or neutralism, the UN or power politics, and always, insistently, anti-communism or accommodation with the communists. The world is not so simple, Bundy wrote, and with John F. Kennedy, we enter a new age. Over and over, he, Kennedy, insisted on the double assertion of policies which stood in surface contradiction with each other: resistance to tyranny and relentless pursuit of accommodation, reinforcement of defense and new leadership of disarmament, counterinsurgency and the Peace Corps, openings to the left, but no closed doors to the reasonable right, and alliance for progressive and unremitting opposition to Castro, in some, the olive branch and the arrows. Bundy learned that it is necessary to work both sides of the street in order to secure and expand the American empire. Hence, he was a staunch supporter of Kennedy and Johnson's war policies in Vietnam, while at the time stressing the necessity of keeping channels open to the Soviet Union. Such a man was perfectly suited to work with Black groups, including Black power advocates, while at the same time local governments were arming and preparing to use force to suppress the Black communities. The seeming contradiction here, to use Bundy's words, was only a surface manifestation. While the bright young men of the Ford Foundation were calmly assessing the Black revolt, the nation's public spokesman fanned the flames of hysteria. For them, Black power was an unfathomable evil. It smacked of racism in reverse and threatened violence. We must reject calls for racism, warned Vice President Hubert Humphrey, whether they come from a throat that is white or one that is Black. Even before Carmichael mentioned Black power, columnists Evans and Novak had launched a smear campaign in Washington Post on May 25, 1966, by describing him as the voice of the extreme Black races. Roy Wilkins, head of the NAACP, integrated the anti-Carmichael attack by stirring up fears of violence. We of the NAACP, he solemnly announced, will have none of this. It is the father of hatred and a mother of violence. Black power can mean in the end only Black death. And that's interesting because we saw that happen, within our lifetimes. What would happen is if you've seen a protest that was too violent or, looting, busting windows at the Gucci store, all of a sudden everyone's saying that's not the way you protest. You don't do it like that. And again, what ends up happening is every time they look at that weakness, that break in unity, and take advantage of it and use the divide and conquer tactic. And then you can get one side to concede. And it's usually the side who enforces like respectability politics or, we got to perform for the state. And if we just perform well, then they'll give us our freedom type shit. Them are usually the first ones to fold very easily. Let's see. While the bright young men of Ford Foundation were, hold on, I lost my place. Oh, the most sophisticated assault came from our critic, Bernard Rustin. Rustin was forced to admit that progress was an illusion, that Black people were in worse economic shape, lived in worse slums, and attended more highly segregated schools than in 1954. He admitted that civil rights laws were not being effectively enforced, yet he still contended Southern Negroes, despite exhortations from SNCC to organize themselves into a Black Panther Party at the time, this was the popular name of the County Freedom Organization, are going to stay in the Democratic Party. To them, it is the party of progress, the New Deal, the New Frontier, and the Great Society, and they are right to stay. That's a quote from Rustin. For Rustin, it was inconceivable that Blacks could do anything outside of the liberal labor coalition of the Democratic Party, even though he was well aware of the deceptive nature of the progress which this coalition loudly claimed to have made on behalf of Black people. For him, Black power was a threat not because it portended racism or violence, but because it further undermined an already shaky coalition. This, basically, he was pandering for old phase. The winning of the right of Negroes to vote in the South ensures that eventually transformation of the Democratic Party, the Negro vote, will eliminate the Dixiecrats from the party and from Congress, Rustin intoned, in a subtle effort to entice Black militants back in the reformist fold. In a word, he could not part with his own illusions about a liberal civil rights coalition which would work to make the Democratic Party truly responsive to the aspirations of the poor. Over the succeeding years, these words were to acquire an increasingly hollow ring. So I'm gonna stop there, stop the recording there. And I'll probably pick it up maybe tomorrow. I'm gonna see how I feel. But yeah, thank y'all for coming.